what we will learn today is something very straightforward, okay? All right, it may look a little bit scary, but it is extremely, extremely simple, okay? So, so we have a little symbol right here, okay? This symbol, it's new, I would say, unless you were in AAC Algebra 2. Anybody AAC Algebra 2? Okay, so you, huh?
What time is it learned in AAC?
At the end, at the final weeks of AAC Algebra 2. Okay. Did you see this last year? Yeah, so last year, right? Now, we didn't cover this in regular Algebra 2 last year, which because it's not really that difficult. So we were like, yeah, let's go ahead and cover this in class in PreCal. So this is known as step function. Step function, okay? It's also called, you can call it the greatest integer function. I don't like to call it this way. I just call it step function. Or if I have to call something, I would call this, oops, the previous or the either the previous or the preceding integer function. And what was the integer beforehand? Okay, what was the integer beforehand? All right, so we are not going to finish this table now. I'm going to come back later. And let's take a look at the example down below first, okay? Because I want you to see how it plays out. So now I'm going to do this by columns. First column, second column, okay? So now it might be useful if you draw a little number line for yourself, okay? Just for you to see how to think about the previous integer. So we have a little 0 right here, -1, -2, 1, and 2, okay? So, so we're gonna look at the number line, and that should help you consider what is the previous integer, okay? Now, if it is already an integer, it stays at that integer, okay? So what is the step function of 0? Now, how about this? Let me go ahead and give you a better notation. So step function of 0 is equal to 0. Okay? It's already an integer, so it is the integer. Okay? Then what about step function of 0.3? Yeah, the previous integer, that will be 0. What is the step function of 0.7? Everybody. 1, 2, 3. 0. Thank you. So this is not about rounding. Okay, it is not about rounding. It's about going back to the previous integer. Okay? Yes.
How do you draw the sign easily? Like the brackets?
You can say bracket and then put a little stroke in between. I mean, inside it. That works. It is, I mean, it is a bracket-ish. Like it is a bracket, and then you put a little vertical stroke inside. And if you draw something like this, I'll be very happy. Okay. Oh, yes. If you just draw a bracket like this, you are wrong. You are dead wrong. Because the bracket is like a parentheses. Okay, without that vertical stroke, it's a totally different thing. And by the way, since you mentioned about the symbol right here, this is not absolute value. For some reason, some students thought that this is absolute value. This is not. Okay. All right, next column. Step function of 1 is just 1. Okay. What about step function of something like if you look at the number line? Okay, this is where I do the pointer right here. It's 1.2. So therefore, what's the step function of 1.2? It will be 1. Okay. So now I think you get a good hang of the stuff. So step function of 1.8 would be also 1. All right, now go ahead, finish the next 2 columns, okay? Go ahead, finish the next 2 columns on your own. Okay, just the next 2. And I'm going to write stuff down so that we can put down the answers a lot easier in a moment. So again, it's not bracket. It's a bracket with a stroke inside the bracket. Now, when it becomes a negative, when the number inside a step function is a negative, I would advise you that you be very careful, okay, in thinking about these numbers, and using number line would be very, very helpful. Okay, so step function of 2 is 2. Step function of 2.1 is 2, and step function of 2.9 is 2. And you might have guessed like, oh, I think I can see a pattern, right? Like, hey, all these are zeros, all these are ones, all these are twos. Haha, might be something's going on here. So step function of -1 is -1. Step function of -0.2. All right, now I'm not going to ask you for the answer yet. I'm going to say, all right, where is step function of -0.2? It's right here. What is the previous integer? -1. You know what's the very tempting answer? People would answer 0. Okay, but it is not 0. And that's why I gave you the number line, so that you can see how it is -1, the preceding integer right here. Okay, -0.2, the preceding integer, it's -1. And then what about -0.6? Somewhere right here, the preceding integer is -1. Okay. And then f of -2, it's -2. And then we have f of -1.3. So let me go ahead and show you the pointer right here. -1.3, it's right here. And that will be step function of -1.3 will be -2 again. Okay, again, you're gonna ask the right question. Okay, what is the previous integer? Yes.
So in my mind, I count the previous one differently from positive to negative. The previous one is actually just the one closer to 0. That's what I thought instead of like the.
Well, that's why you use a number line. That's why you use number line. If you use number line, you count the same way. There's no difference. But if you say you're counting it differently, that's only because you are looking at the number itself, not with the sign. That's how it can cause confusion. Okay, use number line. It's very consistent. Nothing special. Okay, so now, any question about how step function works? Are we good? Anyone use Desmos? Yes. Okay. Now, so if you use Desmos, it actually does not have that little bracket thing. If you use Desmos, you would go to a function, and then you scroll all the way down, and you choose something called the floor function. Okay. So floor, it's like the previous number, and this is why we call it a step function, because it looks like a flight of staircase. Okay, so what it does is that whenever you have fractions or decimals in the x value, the y value would always end up to be an integer. So therefore, when we create this graph at above, okay, so we'll say, all right, now assuming that each square is 1 unit, this is how we would do it. Solid circle, a line, and then open circle. Solid circle, align, open circle. Okay, and then you just repeat yourself. Okay, so that's the step function. That's why I want you to actually try out what step function is. Then we come back to describe the graph. Okay, I hope it makes a lot more sense why the graph appears this way. Okay, and can you guess what the domain is? All real numbers. Now, how do you put it in interval notation? So from negative infinity to infinity, and we use parentheses, not bracket for this case, because we don't really know what infinity really is. So we use a parentheses in this case. Now, what about the range, the y value? I think we haven't really talked about range yet. What is the range in this case? Is it all real numbers? It's all integers. Do you know the symbol for integers? That little letter Z for integers. Okay, so yeah, that works.
Is it Z where there's a line like?
In the middle, yes. Like, you know how there were a bunch of numbers in math, like, you know, this is called the real numbers, remember? Okay, and I think this is called the natural number. Okay, so just put an extra line right here. Yeah. Yeah. Now the good thing is we're not going to see step function too often. Okay, we are not going to see step function too often. We are going to say, all right, step function is this. We're going to play with this for a little while, and then we'll move on from it. Okay, so